for joining us today, those here in person and, of course, the people joining us online. My name is Dr. Cynthia Umezulike, and it is my pleasure to chair today's session on Fields to Fairness, Gender and Migrant Labor Rights and Climate Vulnerable Agri-Food Systems. This critical and timely joint panel session is proudly co-organized by the United Nations International Organization for Migration, IOM, the Center for Business and Child's Rights, and the Global Human Rights Center. Our discussion today could not be more urgent. It is critical because agri-food systems are on the front line of climate disruptions. Rising heat, erratic rainfalls, and land degradations are not distant challenges. They are realities that undermine the safety, dignity, and livelihood of millions of workers. Those most affected are rural women and migrant laborers who are too often invisible, underprotected, and denied remedy, even though they sustain the very food systems on which we all depend. It is timely because we gather under the forum's theme, anchoring progress and strengthening regional leaderships on human rights through crisis. This session centers the voices, vulnerabilities, and resilience of those often left at the margins. We will hear how inclusive due diligence, fair remedy pathways, and gender-responsive models can transform agri-food systems, supply chains, from exploitation to fairness, from rhetoric to accountability. This is not just about identifying risks. It is about anchoring progress. It is about ensuring that the women who harvest our crops and the migrant workers who sustain our food systems are not left behind in the transition to climate resilient economies. I invite you to engage with openness and urgency. Together, let us strengthen regional leaderships and chart practical pathways that move us from fields of exclusion to systems of fairness, anchoring human rights at the heart of agri-food systems. I am delighted to introduce our panel of experts to share their reflections on how we can embed fairness and accountability in climate-vulnerable agri-food systems. On our panel today, we have on my left, Gayeng Ho. Gayeng is the Director of Research for the Center for Child's Rights and Business. Thank you, Gayeng, for joining us today. And on my right, we have Amit Chowdhury. Amit is the National Officer and Labor Migration Focal Point, United Nations International Organization for Migration, IOM. Thank you, Amit. And on the far end of my right, we have Professor Ngobo Emese. Professor Emese is a professor of law and the head of Faculty of Law of Aberystwyth University in Wales. Thank you, Professor, for joining us. And online, certainly not the least, not the last, the last but not the least, is Marcio Castro de Souza. Marcio is the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization Senior Fishery Officer, International Trade, and also the Secretary of the FAO Subcommittee on Fish Trade. Thank you, Marcio, for joining us today. As we come to a close of this important session on Fields to Fairness, Gender and Migrant Labor Rights in Climate Vulnerable Agri-Food Systems, allow me to share a few reflections. First, today has reminded us why this conversation is urgent. Climate change is not just an environmental issue, it is a human rights crisis. And in our agri-food systems, it is rural women and migrant workers who bear the heaviest burden while enjoying the fewest protections. Second, our panelists and audience, they have also looked at what's at stake and what is possible. From Gayeng, we understood the need for companies to move closer to the farm level, embedding stronger due diligence that recognizes the specific risks faced by seasonal and migrant workers. From Amit, we learned that it is crucial to adapt gender-responsive approaches in climate adaptation to make women work as agents of change for more resilient and just food systems. From Professor MSS, she highlighted the urgent need for legal reforms to ensure women's access to justice for human rights violations and losses. Masio evidenced why small-scale fishers, small aquaculture producers, and vulnerable groups, including women, migrants, and indigenous people, must not be left behind. As Eleanor Roosevelt so wisely reminded us, where, after all, do universal human rights begin? And she noted it begins only in small places close to home. At Global Human Rights Center, I see the truth every day in our work championing gender equality and advancing economic development for rural market women. If human rights do not hold meaning for women in local markets or for migrant workers in distant fields, then they hold little meaning anywhere else. Finally, looking ahead, the pathway is clear. We must embed climate justice, gender equality, migrant workers' rights into human rights due diligence frameworks, ensuring they move from TikTok exercises to transformative tools. We must scale inclusive models and bring the voices of women and migrant workers directly into decision-making. We must strengthen collaborations across sectors and regions to deliver remedies that are fair, accessible, and durable. Today's dialogue has shown us that leadership is not about words or commitments alone. It's about accountability, fairness, and action. Let us live here with a shared resolve to move our agri-food systems from fields of exploitation to fields of fairness, and to ensure that women and migrant workers who sustain us are no longer overlooked, but placed at the very center of resilience and rights. If human rights truly begin in small places close to home, then our task is clear: to ensure that every farm, every market, and every field of labor becomes a place where dignity, fairness, and justice take root. Thank you to the United Nations, the joint co-organizers, our panelists, and to all of you for your engagement today. And we can and must ensure that justice and dignity are harvested alongside the food that sustain us all. I now draw this session to a close. Thank you all, and do have a safe trip to your various destinations. And as they say in Thailand, Kapun Ka.